Okay, so I want to start out just by talking about what is logic. What are we going to be doing in this class? What are we going to cover? Um, and I think a very simple way to put this, very short, is that logic is about evaluating arguments. We're going to learn about evaluating arguments, what's a good argument, what's a bad argument. Um, but it focuses on one particular aspect of arguments, structure. But, I don't think either of these statements, they're right, but I don't think either are terribly informative. They don't tell you a whole lot in and of themselves. So I think we have to dig a little deeper into each of them. And the first thing we have to do is to talk about what we mean by an argument in this class. Look, in ordinary talk, we have a few ideas about what an argument is, right? You might think of just these blowhards on cable news insulting each other, or more likely, getting a guest on to just insult or like browbeat this poor guy, right? Or you might think of two politicians standing on a stage, the great American debate, which we're all so proud of in our political tradition, where they just look for an excuse to trot out their canned sound bites and abuse the other guy, right? Or you might think of that couple in a restaurant we're all trying not to look at, right? You know, yes, we use the word argument for those things. That's not what we mean. We often use argument just to mean a verbal conflict. You know, I'll avoid the word that comes to mind. So anyway, one important thing to keep in mind is both the premises and conclusions are propositions, right? I just use this term. Lavin uses this. I think it's worth saying a little bit more about this. A proposition is just a sentence or a statement that can be true or false. Now, this proposition idea is not going to be super important right now. For the next few weeks. It'll be really a lot more important when we get to more formal logic, so I do think it's worth taking a first pass at this. And it's also useful a little bit now because, when we talk about, well, we're interested in premises and conclusions, they're propositions, so it's kind of useful now because, like, anything that's not a proposition, you're just going to want to ignore. But, I'll say a little bit. If this distinction isn't super clear to you right now, don't worry, we'll say more about it later, but I do think it's worth taking a first pass, right? A proposition is just a statement that can be true or false, a sentence that can be true or false. One thing we do with words, one thing we do with language, is to make statements that can be true or false. We do a lot of other things with words. We ask questions, we make requests, we insult people. That gets mistaken for argument a lot, just people call each other names and stuff. All of those things are not propositions. That's not what we're interested in, right? Here are some propositions. 2 is the only prime number. The sun is older than the earth. Biden is the president of the US. We aren't going to talk about the history of philosophy in this course or talk much about it. Paul McCartney is a better drummer than Ringo. John Lennon wasn't a very nice guy. The number of hairs on my head is an odd number, right? Right. Anyway, some non-propositions. Please be quiet. I hereby call this meeting to order, you jerk, right? Look, these are other things you do with words, right? You can call a meeting to order, you can ask somebody to be quiet, you can call them names, right? This last one, the jerk one, might be close to being a proposition, but it's not really, right? You're not, you're just calling somebody a name, you're not making a claim. Now, look, one important point, and I'm going to harp on this a lot, the proposition, not a proposition distinction is not at all the same thing as the supposed distinction between facts and opinions. I don't really I know your English teachers have just drilled and drilled and drilled, or at least some of them have, this fact opinion distinction or supposed distinction in your head. I really don't like it. I think it's really simplistic and misleading, but whatever. Won't get off on that too much. But even if you like the fact-opinion distinction, even if it is a good distinction, it's not the same thing as propositions and not propositions. Look, something can be a proposition and it might never be clear whether it's true or false. We might never know, right? Look at this last one on this slide. The number of hairs on my head is an odd number. I will never, ever in the history of the universe know how many hairs are on my head at this specific moment. Just will never find that out. No one will, right? No human being, at least, will ever know, right? It might be odd, it might be even. There's a 50% chance either way, I would guess. But we just will never know. Nonetheless, this statement is true or false, right? There is a fact about how many hairs are on my head. There is a fact about whether you can divide that number by 2, right? We don't know. God exists, he knows, but I'm guessing nobody else does, right? We will, at least not in this life, ever know the truth of this statement or false, whether it's true or false, right? So it might be completely unclear whether a proposition is true, right? It might also be really controversial whether it is true or false. A proposition can make a statement that is in any sense of the term opinionated, right? Paul McCartney is a better drummer than Ringo. John Lennon once said that. I would give that as one of the exhibits for John Lennon not being a terribly nice guy, insulting poor Ringo, but whatever, right? It's not clear to me whether this is true or not. I mean, I don't know enough about what makes a good drummer to say whether it's true or not, right? There might be no fact, or sorry, there might not be any facts that we can all agree on to appeal to that would settle this, right? But at least it could be true or false that McCartney is a better drummer than Ringo, right? To see what this is, look at this very similar statement. McCartney is a better drummer than your professor. I can't play drums. McCartney can. Obviously, he's a better drummer than me. Take another one, right? John Lennon wasn't a very nice guy. This is also unclear. This is also opinionated. I think this is true. Lennon used to beat his wife. Lennon abandoned his first son. These are not really things you do if you're a nice guy, right? The counter argument here is always, well, he was always really nice to his fans. He always signed autographs. I'm like, beat your wife on one side of the scale, abandon your child on it. Really nice to your fans. I don't think that quite balances out. Anyway, that might be unclear. Some people disagree with me. Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, who killed his own brother, isn't a very nice guy, who tortures political opponents. That's pretty clearly true, right? All right, so hopefully you guys have at least some idea of this proposition, not a proposition distinction. So having taken a little detour through this stuff about propositions, not a proposition, which we'll touch on a lot in this class, let's get back to just looking at what an argument, at least an argument in the sense of the term we're interested in arguments, is in this class, right? Here's a very simple, and also, I say slightly here, but very artificial argument. This is the one every logic textbook uses. It's weird. Why would you make this argument? I don't know, right? Every logic book uses it, so we'll use it, right? All men are mortal, meaning everybody, all human beings are going to die. By men, they mean human beings. By mortal, they mean is going to die. Socrates is a man. That is a human being. So Socrates is mortal, that is, he's going to die. Premises: all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, so Socrates is mortal, right? These two premises, every human being's going to die, Socrates is a human being, support this claim, Socrates is going to die, right? Anyway, a less artificial and somewhat more complex argument. A lot of times in logic, people will use these very simple arguments to make a point, even though they're very artificial as well. If you don't do your homework in logic, you will get zeros for the homework assignments. You will also be unprepared for tests and probably do badly on them. So if you don't do your homework, you can't get an A in the course and you'll probably fail. Since you likely want an A and almost certainly don't want to fail, you should do your homework in logic. Premises: if you don't do your homework, you'll get zeros from the homework assignments, you'll be unprepared for the tests and probably do badly on them. So if you don't do your homework, you can't get an A in the course and you'll probably fail. all of these propositions, all of these statements are supposed to support this conclusion. Do your homework, right? It says more than that, but that's the gist of it. One really important thing I want to end with, and one question you should always ask yourself when looking at any piece of writing or any statements by another person, especially an argument, but just really anything anybody does, whether it's a written piece, whether they're talking with you, what are they trying to do, right? We do things with language. We talk for a reason, right? It might just be to like shoot the breeze, as they say, right? But we have a reason for talking. We have a reason for writing. What is the other person's reason? What are they trying to do? If they are trying to give you reasons to believe or do something, then they're likely giving you an argument. If not, if they're just talking about their day, if they're just complaining, or they just want to tell you about a movie they saw or something, all this other stuff, they're probably not giving you an argument, right? What are they trying to do? That is really important in determining whether this is even an argument or not. One final thing that's very tricky, people have a lot of trouble with this, and it is important, are arguments versus explanations. Here's an explanation. You see fewer stars in the city because of light pollution. Here's an argument. The government should ban or restrict bright lights and other sources of light pollution because they keep us from enjoying the night sky. So why do I say this first is an explanation and the second is an argument? An explanation, you take a claim that people accept that's obviously true and you try to explain it. It's obvious you see fewer stars in Norfolk or Virginia Beach than if you do if you go out to far southwestern rural Virginia. You'll see less stars in the middle of the city than you probably would even if you just go to South Virginia Beach into like Pungo, right? It's uncontroversial. Nobody denies you don't see as many stars in the city as you do in the country, right? A lot of people would deny, a lot of people would disagree with this claim that we should ban or restrict bright lights so people can see more stars. Let me give you guys one more even clearer example of this. Explanation. The issue of abortion is controversial because it involves sex, religion, and babies, which are always emotionally charged things. Look, whatever you think about the issue of abortion, you might think it's obviously wrong and should be legal. You might think that it's a fundamental right that every woman ought to have. You might think people who disagree with you are just awful people. But even if you think all that, you have to admit it's controversial, right? This is an issue people disagree about. Unless you've been living in a cave, you know that people disagree about this issue, right? No one denies this. This is offering an explanation of why this is so controversial. Abortion ought to be legal because women have a right to do what they want with their own bodies, and restrictions on abortion interfere with that right. Abortion ought to be legal. Whether you agree or disagree with that, you know that a lot of people don't agree with that claim. It is very much controversial. It is very much open for debate in a way that this claim that abortion itself, the issue is controversial, isn't, right? So, explanation versus argument can be confusing because the form of an explanation, you have all these claims or propositions that relate to one other claim, looks a lot like an argument, but really to distinguish the two, is the claim controversial or not? Is it something most people accept? If people accept it, if it's obviously true to most people, then it's an explanation. If it is controversial, if people disagree about this, it's probably an argument.